the great thing is I've probably flown with just about half of you in the room. And I look at Colin, and I probably spun aeroplanes with quite a few of you as well, and all the other things. And I think it's important at our level that we practically immerse ourselves in the problem as well as the solution. And Paul and I started this concept of how do we fix this? How do we get the industry to actually get on the same page, if you like, so that we can actually fix what is a problem. So I'll just get my head around this thing here. So what I want to talk about today, and it's very interesting listening to Rich this morning and all our speakers so far, is that we nod our heads, and I think that's a really good thing, that we're all passionate about getting it right. We all see the problem, and for all of us that are instructors, we probably get to live it every day. And it's just great that we've come together in a way that can help CASA, but help the industry more importantly, including the associated support functions like insurance, to actually make a better pilot, a safer pilot, and so we don't. I go and investigate accidents as well in my role with RAAus, and so many times we see the fatal consequence of this. So I think it's really important. I'm quite passionate about it, but I'm also very pragmatic about how we need to actually affect some change if we can. So I'm just going to have a chat about the strategies that RAAus is looking at and how to produce better pilots from the start. Okay, and then later this afternoon I'll talk more about our syllabus. Basically, just a bit of an overview for RAAus. This is where we bit through data that we grabbed. I grabbed up Cody, our safety manager. We did last year 165,000 flight hours. 405,000 takeoffs and landings were conducted in RAAus, both in training and private operations. We've got 158 flight schools and over 50 satellites, so we represent a fair proportion of the training market and the training footprint in this country. I guess the difference for most of you is that we actually operate three different categories of aircraft. We operate 3-axis aircraft up to 600 kilograms, 650 in a passenger waterborne. Weight shift aircraft, which includes both microlight bikes, you probably saw one out flying this morning, and powered parachutes. So CAS has given us the privilege to administer the CAOs that actually allow us to administer those operations. So we have quite a bit of the sports sector, but what's emerging more into the initial training sector for general aviation, and that's been developing probably over the last 10 years now. And as you can see, based on those numbers, we're a significant training facilitator for pilots that go on to become commercial and ATPL. In fact, we've got over 30% of our flight training schools approved under RAAus that are also Part 141 or specialist approvals with CASA. So there's been quite a convergence, and the old GA, RA, ultralight pilot, a lot of that discussion doesn't really happen much anymore because we've integrated and morphed into basically the training sector. And the training sector through RAAus has actually helped facilitate much of this training. My job is to make sure that the training is appropriate for the industry, not just for our end of the industry, for those pilots that go on as well. And as you can see, we fly 70% of the total Australian operational hours. So that's a lot of hours. And we do it with 15 people and that work full time for the organisation. I think CASA at last count got about 740 or 760 people, and I know how hard they work to get things done. So it's a tough job, and we just take small bites. This is what we see as the fundamental problem. I think hopefully most of us will agree. Over 80 years of flight operations, or 100 if you want to go back to Otto, loss of control remains the most significant serious fatal accident contributor. Now, we talk about the fatal five in driving, and I guess governments around the world try to work out how to address that problem. These are all examples. The last one happened here. It's just a simple PIA. The first one was a fatal. The first one wasn't a fatal. I wouldn't show a fatal one up there. The pilot actually walked away from that in that first accident. Stall spin. And the second one was a botched missed approach or go round. What we've got to do is look at why we haven't fixed this problem. And I'm going to provocate some thoughts here, and I'd be keen to just stop and get some discussion if we can. Do we train, and I know we do because our syllabus actually asks us to demonstrate and not prepare. So we demonstrate through a very, sometimes artificial loss of control, and we have the student or pilot replicate that back to us in terms of a procedure, and we tick the box, whether it be a flight review or whether it be the introduction and exercise. The problem with that is that the trailer, what we've shown them already, doesn't actually live up to the movie. It doesn't live up to what really happens in real life. Our training at the moment is often rote developed and then experientially based. And that experience they get is, in often cases, there's only less than 20 to 30 hours, where there actually is constructive experience being delivered. What we want to do is actually do two things. We want to change the training so it's more focused around scenarios, real scenarios where you're likely to lose control, and also to make sure that those scenarios equip the pilot with the right skills, behaviours, decisions and recognition so that they can fix the problem. And we've already talked about that a lot this morning. The other thing, and I heard somebody touch on this today, and this is where our instructor base becomes a problem, and I'll just go back and quote just a very short story. It's not a very nice story, but it's probably symptomatic of part of the industry. I asked the question, have we instilled fear in the stall, the spin, rather than skill? We talk about it a lot. We all know it's the most common cause of accident. But I think we just heard before that instructors are even scared. We've talked this thing to death for so many years that we're actually scared of the boogeyman when it actually comes to putting rubber on the road, or feet on the ground, or wings in the air, whatever you want to call it. And I see this, and I'll just recall a story. In 2015, I did a CFI renewal. I went up in a two-seat ultralight aircraft to do the renewal. It was a windy day, matter, it was out of, I won't say where it was out of. And we were doing stalling exercises. And the classic delivery from the instructor was, recovery, patted it through, push the nose down, power went to full power. So if we think about pair for a moment, that probably didn't quite work. And we were losing anywhere from 300 to 700 feet in recovery of the stall. And I asked the instructor, I said, so in terms of what we're trying to achieve here in recovery, and I know there's been a shift away from this recovery with minimum height loss, why do you think we lost 400 feet, 600 feet in those last two stalls? The CFI said to me, because we were going downwind that time. So before we even get to upset recovery, we actually have to look at it, and I was pleased that Paul talked about this, the knowledge and the understanding. I had another Qantas Dash 8 captain being assessed for our RAAus instructor rating. When asked about straight level at various airspeeds, the statement was made, the aircraft tasses at about 90 knots. And then we turned around and circuit, and he said, if we're downwind, we're probably doing about 95. And I asked again, I said, so the actual airspeed changed when you were flying downwind? Yeah. I had it on video, because I don't think anyone would believe me. So I think what we've got to do is, when we unpack the upset problem, we've also got to unpack the true understanding of the very people that we're asking to teach our pilots. So it's not just a combination. I'm very much focused on the practical skill. Let's get out there, and I think all of the UPRT instructors and trainers in the room, businesses, will acknowledge that if we don't get it right in the cockpit, we're never going to get it right. We can have all the knowledge, but we've actually got to show where startle comes into effect, where this real scenario happens. How is the pilot going to react? There's a lot of human factors in that as well. But at the moment, I think the biggest problem we've got is that there's not only misunderstanding, there's a lot of fear. And a lot of instructors, when I ask them to demonstrate the stall, we haven't stalled. The nose gets pitched down, it's great, we've recovered, and I spoke to Mike Newell, Passer, probably 12, 18 months ago, and there's a shift from recovery from minimum height loss because of the secondary stall problem to recovery in a normal flight, which is great. We want to get back to control flight as soon as possible. And The problem with that is that we actually don't get to experience the stall in some cases. So some instructors actually don't get to play stall. We get to the point where we've got playing attack, decreasing airspeed, increasing sink rate. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But we don't actually get to the stalled scenario. So we don't see the coupling of controls. We don't see adverse stall. We don't see the asymmetric stall. We don't see all the problems that are going to actually bring us undone. And so that's part of the problem that we've got to try and unpack when we look at training and what we're going to do. And our data's telling us the same thing, and I think I saw that before. In 80 years, we've got the same problem, and our data's telling us that. All of us have got pretty mature safety management systems now, from the airlines right down to recreational, and it's mandated SMSs. We've got under 149, we've got a mandated SMS, and we're getting good data now. We're getting, we've had our SMS in place now for 7 years, so we're starting to see some really good data. And it's telling us the same thing. It's not telling us anything that we can probably know, but we've now got data to support it. So if data's telling us the same thing, why won't we change? And I think that, this is a discussion that we've got very passionate, proactive people in the room here today, but we've got to get the industry changed. And I'm so pleased that CASA is as our regulator, is actually driving this as well, because we'll meet in the right place, hopefully, over the next 3 to 4 years, where in 10, 15, 20 years' time, people will look back, our new pilots will come back and say, that's when things changed. That's when they actually did something to get this right. And we won't be sitting here in 80 years' time, when my great-grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, are standing up here saying, we're still doing this after 150 years of flying. That's what drives me, that we actually become agents of change. The very things that we are passionate about and that we know are right. And of course, I've used the same photo that we all know about. So what's RAAus looking at doing? What's our strategy? So this is a strategy I'm working towards, and I'm well immersed into it already. I want to talk about basic training. When should upset prevention training occur? Paul, while we're having this discussion, we sort of let the cat out of the bag a little bit.
Sorry.
From lesson, no, it's good, and it's the thing about coming together is we can actually share this and get the agreement. Effects and controls is really the first upset recovery. But what we do now is we actually demonstrate pitch up and down. We talk about aileron, primary effects, secondary and further effects, and we have the student observe. In fact, the briefings, even the briefings that we have written, say to understand and observe the effects and controls of the aircraft. What if we just did one more thing? Understand, observe, and manage the effects and controls. So thereby, an instructor, after you've got the basics, primary, secondary, and further, instead of doing a 0.4 straight level effects and controls lesson where you've spent 0.3 on the tarmac waiting for clearance, or you've taken 0.3 to get out to the training area and back, what if you actually spent some time putting the aircraft in a pitch up 30 degrees, pitch down 30 degrees or 10 degrees, whatever you want to do, rolling at 40 to 45 degrees less, and actually have the student show you that they can recover it back to straight and level flight, or that attitude. That's where we're starting to build attitude flight. There's lesson one. Now there's some basic stuff. Now I would argue, and I know because when I ask people to deliver effects and controls, and I've probably done 1,000 instructor assessments, when they do that, it's very rote based. It's demonstration. Now we play blogs on, blogs off, and we do lots of things, but not many people actually sit there and actually go to the next level. Show me how you manage that. Correct that for me. We might do it, say, look, nose is pitched down, I want you to bring it back up to the wing attitude. But we don't actually even go to that 11% box. Now, for some people, first lesson, you don't go to 11% because we don't want to take 45 or 60 degree roll rates because we'll scare people out of flight training. But the reality is that effects and controls is the place. I asked the same question about human factors. Why do we wait till the end? In 2008, when we all started incorporating human factors and non-technical skills into our training, we still had the human factors exam at the end, or you went and did a course for a day and you got signed off for your human factors. Why aren't we weaving human factors in from day one, which is what I've done with the Flight Instructor Reference Manual, to change this nebulous concept of airmanship into all the technical and operational elements, CRM, SA, ADM, and so on, and threat and error management. build those from day one. The very first lesson, effects control, so it's the same thing. If we're going to get immersion in change our pilots, first of all, we've got to get our instructors to know how to do it. But the second thing we've got to do is we've got to start from day one. Because teaching anything, and it's great that we've got upset prevention training businesses out there that are actually, actually fixing the need, but we're at the end of the problem. What we've got to do is go back to the start of the problem and not have it in the first place. So I'll show you this afternoon what we're doing in the syllabus and some things that are actually going to change that. But we're going to get better immersion. And the other thing, of course, is that there's a lot of pressure now, time pressure, money pressure. We're not the pilots we were 40, 50 years ago. Pilots come along with an expectation that they'll spend 5, 6, 7, 10 grand and they'll get a pilot license. There's a lot of competency-based recording of competencies and moving on to the next element. The student actually expects, when am I going to get to circuits? When am I going to get to landing? When am I going to go solo? They're check-in, check-out McDonald's thinking as well. There's a lot of social change that's happened where pilots have an expectation, particularly in the veterinary health world, where there's ASCA requirements that have to be met in terms of payments. There's a lot of push to move pilots through the system and the process. I don't know about most of you, I'm assuming most of you probably spent hours and hours in a tug Oster or at the Aero Club and streamer cutting and doing, and I was only a 14, 13-year-old kid. But I gather most of us here have probably lived that and lived a very broad experience from a very early age. That doesn't tend to happen that much. Pilots come into the flight school, they're booked in for their 10 o'clock lesson, they're out by 11:30, and it's in their logbook, and they move on to the next lesson. That doesn't allow immersion. And you can teach the lesson, but you can't gain the understanding by checking in and out in one hour. Now, we can't often change that, but we've got to do better what we do now in the way we deliver that hour and a half that we've got that student, that pilot. And then provide resources like simulation, fixed resources, video resources, where that enhanced learning, that anchored learning will actually be embedded after the lesson. So there's a lot of things we can do, but we can't keep doing it the same way. Otherwise, we're going to end up with the same 80-year problem. What we've developed as well, and I started with the guide looking at the spin recovery syllabus from CASA Part 61, but we've developed an upset recovery syllabus. It's with some of my colleagues here already. They're actually reviewing it. It's still in draft. I'll show you some of the elements, but we focus a lot more on the uncontrolled state. We look a lot more at balance. We look a lot more at things like exercises that will actually give a better understanding of pre-stall, pre-wing drop, if you want, or incipient. We look at falling leaf. But the problem we've had up till now with the UPRT is that we haven't had any way to really integrate it into the RAAus syllabus. Now, I was heartened to say that we can, that there are ways we can do it even within the limitations of a non-aerobatic or non-utility aircraft. And we've already got the Lazy 8, the Advanced Pilot Award, which is a very underutilised award, which I've rewritten for the UPRT. But what we're going to do is we're going to roll out the UPRT syllabus. It won't be mandatory for pilots. It'll be the same as what Rich talked about and recommended, but we are going to make it mandatory for instructors. They'll have a period of which they'll have to do this. Now, CASA is not imposing that on us. We're having discussions with CASA now about our Group G or our lightweight aeroplane proposal, which was originally scheduled under Part 103, that's now in the CAO. Our Group G instructors will have to be able to be competent from spin recovery. We're going to enhance that to actually full UPRT. Because it's not just about spin recovery. There are so many other upsets that you can get into in an aircraft other than just the stall spin, even though that might be a significant one. So we're going to be rolling it out for all instructors. Now, at the moment, it'll be something that will be coming in. And the good thing is right now, as I said, 30% of our flight schools have got instructors that have actually got their current grade instructors from 3 upwards. They've already have to have a spinning endorsement in order to hold that rating under the FIR grade 3 or higher. So those instructors have got a part now. Is it enough? We can talk about that at length, okay? And I think we've already heard some stories about instructors that have it on their licence, but we would question, are they competent enough, as Rich put up in that definition this morning, to actually cover, understand, and instruct in it? Of course, all this has to be done in line with our 149 responsibilities. I've got a firm belief that if we fix the loss of control, in order to fix the loss of control accident problem, we need to get into upset recovery. And we won't see it probably for 5 to 10 years, but we'll start to see the long-term benefits of, ironically, ultralight pilots were known to be good stick and rudder pilots. We had to be. And if you fly a Dragonfly tow plane that, it's a ragged tuber, the thing basically turned on rudder. But, and this was like Oscars and, to a lesser degree Tigers, I guess, back in the day. But we're starting to lose some of that stick and rudder capability because we give high performance ultralight light sport aircraft these days. They're really just VH aircraft with numbers on their side. So our SMS is still telling us that we're, some of our stick and these primacy skills are starting to erode, and we need to get back to that. So this is not, so there's the practical package, there's the syllabus, and of course education. And education is a multifaceted thing that we've got to do. I often say to Jill and our team that we can pontificate as an administrator from a head office, but the only place it really matters is when you're actually out in the cockpit or face to face with your fellow pilots and maintainers from a maintenance point of view. You've actually got to get your hands dirty in this if you're going to get it right. And so that's why I'm very much want to make sure that we actually get it out into the operational space. We don't just have simulation, we just don't have documents and resources. They're great tools to have, but you've actually got to meet it with the actual practical flying. And starting with our instructors, I developed a program through our PDP 6 years ago with a top-down thing. If we're going to change the culture of our instructors, we have to start from the top. We've got 68 pilot examiners, we've got 448 flight instructors. I can't fix 10,000 pilots. I won't live long enough. My predecessors, my successors won't live long enough. But we can work on 65, 68 examiners, our instructor trainers, and our flight instructors. And that's our process. We've got a top-down strategy, and I'm glad to see everybody's here. It's already been talked about this morning. Instructors is where we have to fix this. Fix the instructors, and we'll fix it through immersion and through the new instructors. We've got to put a stake in the ground, and we have to just manage the old dogs, because you almost call me that, at least I'm on board. We have to manage the older instructors that say, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just going to go back and do it my way. So we manage that end. It's the same with pilot compliance and school compliance and all those things. We can only influence change, and I'm very much of the view that rather than mandate it, we have to recommend it and make it easier. And people will, if you do the right thing, people will follow, but you can't force them to follow you. So that's basically where we're at. Our problem in training that sort of where this is really becoming an issue is we're starting to see an increase in dual loss of control accidents. So qualified instructors on board with students losing control of the aircraft in a training environment. So that tells me culturally that we've got a problem with our instructors. Now, one of the things we have seen is we've probably seen about a 30% increase in instructors converting from GA or Part 61 over to RAAus. Now, part of COVID's done that. There's a lot of stuff. There's our building that needs to go on. The vet schemes are pulling them out of vet school with no operational block time. So those instructors that are freshly minted with the white shirts are coming into RAAus to just try and build some hours. Now, CAS has got limited recognition of non-complex aircraft, but at least they're building aeronautical experience. And in COVID, some of them just came over because they had no job anymore. But what we're seeing is an increasing number of training accidents where this loss of control problem is not being managed in the training environment. And so we ran a series for 2 years talking about control management for instructors. And a lot of it focuses on loss of control and upset prevention. And this is the issue. We want the student and the pilot to learn, but there is a point where we have to get the CRM working. Who's doing what? Who's fixing the problem? Because I've only got 5 seconds till it becomes a damage or an accident. And then we get into the danger zone. So we have 2 problems here. I have a pilot that was taught to fly in a drifter, ground looped on their first solo. Went away, never finished their training, went back out to Thargomindah or wherever they came. They had a drifter in the shed that they were going to fly on their own property. The pilot was reported under the amnesty or self-reported that they'd been flying around at low level in their drifter, and so they went to one of our other CFIs, very good friend of mine, and just recognised by the Queen. Came out and said, look, I need to do some refresher training. I haven't got low level. I haven't done this. The CFI took them up to 3,000 feet. It's I've never been this high, and he'd never actually landed the airplane. The instructor was always on the control sim. So we've got the problem there where we've got instructors that are actually over controlling, and the student thinks they're fine, and then we've got the opposite end where the instructor wants them to learn but lets them go too far. So this is the dilemma we've got in loss of control, is making sure our instructors are competent enough to actually, because it works both ways. So our key strategies are to revamp the existing advanced pilot award, which I've already done through UPR syllabus, include upset recovery elements for instruction proficiency checks. So we're going to be starting to check this now. We're going to be quantifying what the problem is. So we're not going to do it now, I actually incorporate it, and our peers are going to be doing that. We talked about that, and we're going to roll out and hopefully this will be by the end of this year, we'll be rolling out our advanced manoeuvring syllabus. We're probably a little bit ahead of the industry, and I want to make sure that we're consistent with CASA, and that's why I'm talking to most of the providers. But we're certainly going to be in a position, I think March is my project deadline. So I'm keen to see what happens in October this year. And our flight syllabus, which I'll talk more about this afternoon, will include slow flight and upset recovery, and I'm going to spend a bit more time talking about this afternoon. That's all I have. Any questions? Any thoughts? But that's what RAAus is doing.
Yeah, John, a couple of things. First of all, I'd love to see your syllabus in draft form, if that's okay.
Yes.
I'll make sure, Darren, are you able to put my email address up on the screen at lunchtime?
Certainly.
Mobile phone number? Thanks. Yeah, I'd love to see that. That'd be great. Second, this isn't my world. The last time I did anything like this, I was 19, I think. Just interested in the concept of fear. The introduction of, to a student, the idea of an aircraft spin. I'm not sure how many kids come through the door saying, I want to learn to fly. At some point, you're going to have to use the S word or the two S words and talk about it. Is there a way to introduce that without starting like, you know, a lot of people say, oh, mathematics, oh, I can't do that, you know, because somewhere along the way, someone's already empowered them to think that way. Is there some method you use to stop the fear being the issue and get to the learning?
Great question, and I don't have all the answers here for a start. As I said, I think it's a cultural experience thing that the industry has developed this spotlight of fear. If you stall and spin, you're going to die. And I think, you know, if you talk to an aerobatic instructor, as Colin's been saying this morning, you normalise it so that it doesn't become the point where you actually freeze. So the fight, flight or freeze problem is because of fear. And I think Shane might talk a lot about that this afternoon. So this startle, freeze, flight, fight, it's an issue that's embedded in our human nature. When it's culturally been written into our map set of what a stall or a spin is, then the problem is that a new student, it's just like landing. All they hear about is, oh, landings are hard. Landing's got to be the easiest thing to do in an aeroplane. But that's not what our pilots think. They actually think it's hard. So it doesn't matter what you and I know. It's what they think. So when it comes to stalling, it's a two-edged sword, because you go down one end of the aerobatic situation where you normalise it and it becomes comfortable. And I had this discussion with the head of CARS Queensland and Travel Safe about Q-Ride, motorcycle rider training, and advanced training for drivers and riders. And the argument is, if you give somebody skills that's beyond that, where they can drift and ski and emergency brake and all that sort of stuff, that they'll go and do it on the streets and become hoods. I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy. I think you need to upskill people to a higher level so that they don't have to rely on their superior skills, as Paul said this morning. So my view is that we actually have to immerse people in, but advise them that when we teach you this, it's not so you can go out and do aerobatics, because UPRT is not aerobatics, and we'll probably say that 10, 15, 20 times today. So the problem is to get rid of the fear, we have to start early. So we say to kids, don't put your hand on the hot plate. But if we say, look, just run your hand over the top of the hot plate about 5 feet away, how hot's that? So what we've got to do is start to immerse early. And I think the syllabus and introduction early will actually Not normalise it to the point where they become invulnerable, but they'll normalise it to the point where they start to understand it better. Peter?
Maybe, and I'll touch on this a little bit later. First off, Neil and I are colleagues. We work together in one of the areas. Perhaps the answer to your question, John, lies in the way it's approached and the reason we teach people stall spin recovery and the journey you take them on from the unknown to the known, and the reasons why we actually teach those maneuvers in the first place. Rather than we're teaching you to do it, it's more about teaching you to recognise it and then have the primacy to be able to recover from it once you are recognising the onset of those dynamic issues that cause us to be concerned. So maybe I can touch on that a little bit more when we talk about the environment in gliding and why it's taught there and how it's taught.
Yeah, I mean, glider pilots spend 90% of their life at 1.3 VS at a 45 degree back turn.
Or less.
Or less.
More often, it is right on the edge of the envelope.
So, and we don't see glider pilots spinning in every day. Yeah, we see them occasionally, but we don't see that many. Yet they spend their time right on the edge of that envelope, as Peter and I do. So, you know, fortunately that's where I got a lot of my lecture. But, you know, not as I say, most people these days training don't get that depth of immersion. They don't come up, you know, even kids riding bikes these days, they want scooters. You put them on a mountain bike and they haven't learned some of those basic skills. And so culturally and socially we've changed. So what we've got to do is make sure that our syllabus change to actually introduce these things so that fear doesn't become the first product out of the training.
We'll have to, well, one more question for Colin.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You know, it's the way it's delivered as well. If the instructor is nervous, it's going to transpire to everything else. So spinning and stalling becomes difficult because the instructor projects that image because they're not comfortable themselves with it.
Absolutely.
Do you have a video you wanted to show?
Oh yes, sorry, I do.
And then we'll have to move on to
yeah.
the next
So
one.
look, part of our education, and Stephen from Light Studios here, Stephen Lincoln and I have been doing a lot of work. We've had a lot of participants. Shane and Jeremy, Paul's been an enormous help in this. That we started out. We've been on this for 4 years now. But we've got a trailer of a 3-part series that we're introducing. The first part of it will be launched for our safety month in September. It's all about loss